It started with Whiskers. The orange tabby had been wandering our quiet suburban neighborhood for 3 years, a beloved fixture who belonged to Mrs. Chen at the end of Maple Street. Everyone knew Whiskers, everyone loved Whiskers, and everyone except Karen Martinez seemed to understand that a well-cared-for outdoor cat posed no threat to our pristine Willowbrook Estates community. Karen had been elected H.O.A. president 6 months earlier, running on a platform of, quote, maintaining property values and community standards, end quote. What she really meant was feeding her insatiable need to control every blade of grass, every mailbox placement, and apparently, every four-legged resident within our gate-guarded borders. The first complaint arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered personally to my doorstep by Karen herself. She stood there in her pressed khakis and polo shirt, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor, her expression radiating the particular smugness that comes with petty authority. Karen speaking, "Good morning. I trust you received my email about the violation notice. That cat has been spotted in your yard multiple times, and as you know, our CC and our S clearly state that outdoor pets must be leashed at all times." I blinked, still holding my coffee mug. Me speaking, "Karen, that's Mrs. Chen's cat. He just wanders around the neighborhood. He's not bothering anyone." Karen speaking, "The rules apply to everyone, and that includes visitors to your property. You're responsible for ensuring compliance on your lot. The fine is $50, escalating to $100 if not remedied within 72 hours. I should mention that I've dealt with difficult people before in my line of work. 20 years in corporate law and real estate development teaches you patience, strategy, and the value of choosing your battles carefully. I also should mention that those 20 years had been very, very good to me financially." Me speaking, "Karen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Whiskers isn't my cat. He just happens to walk through various yards. I can't control where a cat chooses to walk." But Karen was already walking away, her sensible shoes clicking against my driveway with military precision. Karen calling back, 72 hours. The rules exist for a reason. Over the next week, 3 more violation notices appeared. Whiskers had committed the heinous crimes of sitting on my porch, walking across my lawn, and on one memorable occasion, sleeping under my rose bushes. Each notice carried escalating fines and increasingly creative interpretations of our H.O.A. guidelines. I tried reasoning with her at the monthly board meeting. The community center was packed with residents who had their own Karen stories to share. Bob Peterson had been fined for having his garbage cans visible from the street for 6 minutes past pickup time. The Johnsons were battling a citation for their doormat being the wrong shade of brown. And poor Mrs. Chen was facing threats of legal action for, quote, failure to control her pet's trespassing behavior, end quote. Me speaking, "Karen, these enforcement actions are becoming excessive. We're talking about normal neighborhood life here." Karen stood at the front of the room, her laser pointer casting red dots across her presentation slide titled, quote, "Maintaining Community Excellence Through Consistent Rule Enforcement," end quote. Karen speaking, "Excellence requires sacrifice. If we allow small violations to slide, we open the door to chaos. Property values depend on our vigilance. I've documented 17 separate instances of that cat violating multiple sections of our governing documents." She clicked to the next slide, revealing a detailed chart tracking Whiskers' movements around the neighborhood. She had been photographing and GPS tagging his locations like he was some kind of international fugitive. That's when I realized this wasn't really about the cat. This was about Karen establishing dominance, proving that her authority extended into every corner of our lives. Unfortunately for Karen, she had chosen the wrong person to use as her example. The harassment escalated over the following month. Karen began conducting daily patrols, armed with her camera and measuring tape. She documented Whiskers drinking from puddles in common areas, quote, "unauthorized use of H.O.A. resources," end quote. She photographed him walking on sidewalks, quote, "creating potential liability issues," end quote. She even filed a formal complaint with animal control, claiming he was a stray creating public health hazards. When animal control investigated and found that Whiskers was healthy, vaccinated, and clearly cared for, Karen doubled down. She began leaving strongly worded letters in mailboxes, demanding that residents, quote, take responsibility for enabling this ongoing violation of community standards, end quote. The final straw came when Karen announced her intention to pursue legal action against both Mrs. Chen and myself for what she termed, quote, willful and persistent violation of H.O.A. covenants resulting in community degradation and potential property value impacts, end quote. She had somehow convinced the board to authorize up to $10,000 in legal fees to make her point. That evening, I sat in my home office, looking out at Whiskers peacefully grooming himself under my Japanese maple tree. My degrees hung on the wall behind me, law degree from Stanford, MBA from Wharton. On my desk sat business cards from 3 decades of networking with judges, city planners, real estate moguls, and corporate executives. In my filing cabinet were contracts and agreements worth millions, including some very interesting property acquisitions I had been quietly making around the state. I opened my laptop and began making phone calls. The first was to my attorney, Sandra Kim, who specialized in property law and had an excellent sense of humor about creative legal solutions. Me speaking on phone, Sandra, I need you to research something for me. What are the exact requirements for establishing a business entity in our state, specifically one that could hold property for conservation or educational purposes? The second call was to my old friend David Park, who happened to be the regional director for the state's Department of Environmental Protection. We had gone to law school together, and he owed me a favor from a case I had helped him with years earlier. Me speaking on phone, David, I'm wondering about the process for designating property as protected wildlife habitat. Specifically, what would it take to establish a legitimate sanctuary for outdoor cats? My third call was to Maria Santos, a real estate broker who had helped me with several investment properties over the years. Maria had her finger on the pulse of every property sale and development opportunity within 50 miles. Me speaking on phone, Maria, I need you to quietly research something for me. Who owns the empty lot directly adjacent to Willowbrook Estates, and what would it take to purchase it? Over the next 6 weeks, while Karen continued her daily photo documentation and increasingly shrill demands for immediate action, I quietly put the pieces of my plan into place. The beauty of having both legal expertise and financial resources is that you can accomplish remarkable things when you approach problems strategically. The first piece fell into place when Maria called back with excellent news. The vacant 5-acre lot adjacent to our neighborhood was owned by an elderly man who had been trying to sell it for months. More importantly, the lot shared a property line with the back of Karen's house and included the small wooded area where Whiskers liked to hunt mice. The second piece came together when Sandra finished her research on nonprofit organizations and conservation law. It turned out that establishing a legitimate cat sanctuary required surprisingly little bureaucracy, especially when you had the financial backing to do it properly and the legal expertise to navigate the paperwork efficiently. The third piece was David's confirmation that the state would absolutely support a properly managed outdoor cat sanctuary, particularly one focused on education and responsible pet ownership. In fact, they would even provide small grants for habitat improvement and community outreach programs. I purchased the adjacent property under the name of a limited liability company I had set up years earlier for real estate investments. The transaction was clean, legal, and completely invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Karen, busy with her daily Whisker surveillance, never noticed the, quote, sold, end quote, sign that went up for exactly 1 day before being removed. Next, I filed the paperwork to establish the Willowbrook Community Cat Education and Sanctuary, a legitimate 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting responsible outdoor cat care and educating the public about feline behavior and community integration. The state approved the application in record time, especially with David's office providing a letter of support for our, quote, valuable community environmental education initiative, end quote. The sanctuary's mission statement was particularly carefully worded. We would provide a safe, natural environment for outdoor cats to engage in normal feline behaviors while serving as an educational resource for the community. We would also conduct research on sustainable coexistence between outdoor cats and suburban neighborhoods. I hired a part-time caretaker, installed proper fencing, set up feeding stations, and created comfortable shelters throughout the property. Everything was built to exceed state requirements for animal care facilities. I even installed educational signage explaining outdoor cat behavior and the important role they play in controlling rodent populations. The final piece was reaching out to Mrs. Chen and several other neighbors who had cats that enjoyed outdoor time. Would they be interested in allowing their cats to participate in our educational program? The cats would have access to a safe, supervised area where they could roam freely while we documented their natural behaviors for educational purposes. Mrs. Chen was delighted. Whiskers and 5 other neighborhood cats became our first official residents, complete with veterinary records, identification tags, and participation agreements signed by their owners. 3 months after Karen had first threatened legal action over a cat walking through my yard, I was ready to make my announcement. The monthly H.O.A meeting was more crowded than usual. Word had spread that Karen planned to present her, quote, comprehensive enforcement action plan, end quote, for dealing with what she now called the, quote, ongoing pet violation crisis, end quote. She had prepared a 40-slide presentation detailing her surveillance findings and her recommendations for immediate punitive action. Karen stood at the front of the room, clicking through photographs of Whiskers in various locations throughout the neighborhood. Her voice carried the tone of someone who had spent months building toward this moment of vindication. Karen speaking, as you can see from this documentation, the situation has only gotten worse despite repeated warnings. I have identified at least 6 cats regularly trespassing on H.O.A property. This represents a clear pattern of residents showing complete disregard for our community standards. She clicked to her next slide, showing a map of the neighborhood with red dots marking every location where she had photographed a cat. Karen speaking, I am recommending that the board authorize immediate legal action against all residents who have failed to control these violations. We must send a clear message that rules matter and that our community standards will be enforced. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Karen's laser pointer traced circles around various red dots on her map, each one representing what she saw as evidence of her neighbor's defiance. That's when I stood up, holding a manila folder filled with official documents. Me speaking, Karen, before the board votes on any legal action, I think everyone should be aware of some recent developments that might affect this situation. Karen's laser pointer stopped moving. Karen speaking, what developments? I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. Me speaking, well, first, I should let everyone know that the Willowbrook Community Cat Education and Sanctuary officially opened last month on the property directly behind your house. We're a state-approved 501c3 educational facility focused on outdoor cat behavior research. The room stirred. Karen's face went slightly pale. Karen speaking, what sanctuary? What property? I pulled out the second document. Me speaking, the 5-acre lot adjacent to the neighborhood. I purchased it 3 months ago specifically to create a legal, supervised environment where outdoor cats can engage in their natural behaviors. We have full state approval and support from the Department of Environmental Protection. Karen's clipboard slipped in her hands. Karen speaking, you can't just, there are zoning laws, that's not. Me speaking, oh, it's all completely legal. In fact, our cats are now officially part of an educational program, which means they're protected under state wildlife education statutes. Interfering with their approved activities could actually result in significant legal penalties. I pulled out the third document, the one I had been most looking forward to sharing. Me speaking, but here's the really interesting part, Karen. According to our research, outdoor cats naturally patrol territories of approximately 5 to 10 acres when left to establish their own boundaries. The sanctuary property extends right up to the back of your house, which means this entire neighborhood now falls within the natural patrol range of our educational program participants. The room was completely silent now. Karen stood frozen at the front, her laser pointer dangling from her wrist. Me speaking, so those 17 instances you documented? Those weren't violations. Those were just cats doing exactly what our state-approved educational program is designed to study and protect. In fact, your documentation has been invaluable for our research on natural feline territory establishment. Karen's mouth opened and closed without sound. I pulled out the final document. Me speaking, oh, and Karen? Since you've been so diligent in documenting their locations and behaviors, I've actually submitted your surveillance data to the state as part of our program documentation. They were very impressed with the thoroughness of your observations. You're credited as a contributing researcher in our first quarterly report. I held up the official state letter acknowledging Karen Martinez as a volunteer research contributor to the Willowbrook Community Cat Education and Sanctuary. Karen stared at the letter, then at the documents in my hands, then at the room full of neighbors who were beginning to smile as they realized what had just happened. Her face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, the dawning horror of someone who has just realized that their weapon has been turned completely against them. She had spent months building a case against cats being in the neighborhood, only to discover that she had actually been documenting evidence supporting their protected status. Her own surveillance data had been used to establish that these cats belonged exactly where they were. Every photograph, every GPS location, every detailed complaint had become proof that the cats were engaging in normal, protected educational program activities. Karen looked down at her 40-slide presentation, then back up at me, her eyes wide with the recognition that she had been completely, utterly, and permanently outmaneuvered.